Milwaukee Public Television is proud to present Next Avenue, Community Conversations. Next Avenue brings baby boomers and beyond smart, useful information and compelling perspectives. Our goal is simple: to provide provocative information that makes your life more meaningful and enjoyable. This program is made possible in part by funding from our good friends at the Helen Bader Foundation. On this episode, straight talk about dollars and cents, a candid conversation about money management and financial planning. We are coming to you from the beautiful Port Exploreum in Port Washington, Wisconsin. Now here's your host, Mark Seekers.
Just how savvy is the 50-plus generation when it comes to planning for a future, even planning for expenses today? You know, planning for the future while planning for tomorrow can be quite complicated. So for the next hour, we're going to be sorting through a lot of financial issues as it relates to retirement planning, as it relates to estate, probate, as it relates to the risks involved of attempting to diversify our investments. But in order to do that, we are blessed with an outstanding group of financial professionals to help shed some light on the various questions that we have regarding our retirement and everyday expenditures. First of all, let me introduce to you DJ Verhalen. He is U.S. Bank Vice President, Senior Financial Advisor. We're also joined by Kathy Pirtle. She is U.S. Bank Senior Vice President, Trust and Managing Director. Jane Alardio is with us. She is a U.S. Bank Senior Vice President, Metropolitan Wisconsin Regional Manager for Consumer Banking. And we are joined by Eric Swinson, who is president of the investment advisory firm Retirement Plan Solutions. And Mr. Swinson's firm also works quite closely with Port Washington State Bank, which of course is located right here, just on the very block where we're talking to you this evening. How about a round of applause for our I'm really delighted that you're all here, and you all have great insight and fine minds, and I enjoyed our conversation before we started our program tonight. The first question I'd like to just toss out, Jane, maybe you can get us going, is, you know, how good are we at financial planning? Our age group, 50 plus, how good of a job are we doing right now, in your opinion?
Well, we can do better. You know, this notion of accepting responsibility for where you are today, beginning to think through how you can get answers to the questions that you have, and then progressing from there is just mission critical at this point. There's a sense of urgency, and perhaps this came from generations before of perhaps not sharing as much forethought as we should. But most Americans at this point that are in their baby boomer years have many pressing questions, and we're here to solve those tonight and answer those. Why
are we perhaps less prepared than previous generations, in your opinion? What are the factors that contribute to that?
Well, certainly thinking through how many changes we've all been through since the 80s. Perhaps we didn't have as much of a notion about financial planning and how important that was. We joked earlier that, you know, you might spend more time planning for a vacation than thinking through your retirement plans. Perhaps it wasn't as unpredictable then as it is now. So there are many factors at play. Many employers offered many benefit plans that now today we find ourselves thinking through that they may or may not exist in the future. So it just wasn't as top of mind, perhaps. And now going through the financial downturn that we all have, it's very much top of mind for all of us on how can we make this a bit more predictable and feel good and comfortable about the decisions we're making.
Retirement has changed over the years. When I first started in the business, it was your home, it was a pension, and Social Security benefits. That was the majority of what we thought of from a retirement standpoint. And that's changed. Pensions may or may not be there. Social Security has many different options. And your home, we just went through a credit crisis, which was extremely difficult to get through. And what we were going to rely upon from a retirement asset has changed. So we have to evolve. It's a little bit more complicated than just those three items. And that's where financial planning needs to come in play.
Therefore, how have the rules of financial planning itself, Eric, changed?
Well, if I may back up and add one more comment or echo what they both just mentioned, I think the generation before the baby boomers had a little bit of a different world to live in. They showed up for their 30 or 35 or 40 years of consecutive working for, in many cases, 1 or 2 companies, and they got this gift every month in retirement that came in the mail called a pension check. And between the pension check and the Social Security, in many cases, they were able to maintain their lifestyle in retirement. That world changed pretty dramatically, largely in the early to mid-'80s, and the education that's shared today was not shared at that time. So a lot of those baby boomers missed 10, 15, 20 years. Rather than just showing up each day and knowing that some magic check would be there in the future, they had to do something, and they weren't aware of that.
And Kathy, that's one of the things in the planning process you have to do. You have to visualize what kind of lifestyle you want in retirement, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the reality of what you're dealing with now, right?
Correct. You really need to figure out, you have to have a plan. You have to have a starting point, and you need to determine what your goals are. Do you want to maintain the lifestyle that you currently have? Do you want to live a higher lifestyle? And if you do, how are you going to get there? There are many things that happen that when you're going through a plan that could derail the plan or enhance the plan, and then you have to make adjustments to that.
But first you need your client to bring you the proper information in order for you to steer him or her in the right direction. What do you need from your client, TJ?
That is key. We always say paint your financial picture for us. And if that picture is half painted, we're not going to get the full effect out of that painting and or the plan itself. So it's extremely crucial to get to know your advisor, get to know your planner, bring the necessary documents, be able to open up about many different topics. It could go from banking, it could go to investments, it could go to what you want for a goal for your family. So again, it's really important to trust that advisor and make sure that you're giving them the proper information.
And Jane, how important is a holistic approach to your planning process? It's all connected, is it not?
It really is, Mark. I'm glad you brought that up. You know, having a holistic plan at this point in time is critically important. There's so many variables. We used to perhaps solve for what is that magic number that I'm going to need in my retirement. And it's not just about a number. There are many variables now that come and go. And so we need to approach it with a comprehensive set of solutions. Oxford Economics has shown when you partner with someone that you feel comfortable with, that you can entrust with the truth and transparency in your greatest fears and your greatest aspirations, you will wind up perhaps receiving 82% of your median income compared to folks that don't partner and collaborate on a transparent basis. You find yourself at 56% of your income stream that you now are relying on. So holistic planning, and I think really think through, how can I bring full capabilities by my side to help me navigate the changes that I'm experiencing in my life and perhaps anticipate better unexpected changes that I haven't even thought about yet.
So when you work with your colleagues, legal minds and financial minds and whatever, in your process with your team approach, Eric, what does that look like? Does it start with sitting down with your client at a conference table and having maybe 5 or 6 colleagues there listening to the same approach, or how does it in effect work?
I would say yes, and the goal is to be able to create a synergy, so to speak, between the various providers that they have in their life, so to speak, or service providers such as their CPAs and their attorneys. And as we chatted about before, most people probably haven't done that. And so sometimes you have, for example, investment issues and income issues in retirement certainly could benefit from having the CPA involved. When it comes to trust issues and when it comes to things like estate issues, you want the attorney to be involved. And in many cases, the clients don't have the expertise or knowledge to know how to drive that bus. So when you have a competent financial advisor to assist you in the process, they can help identify the issues. And even if you don't sit down together and do it, at least communicate with the respective parties to help the client achieve the end goal that they're looking to achieve.
Now, Kathy, you were explaining to me earlier that it's essential when you're planning for retirement that you also, and I don't mean to be the grim reaper here, but you also have to plan on your passing.
You do.
Inheritance.
You have to really create your estate plan, which is your plan to transfer your assets either during your lifetime, because many people gift during their lifetime, or at death. And if you don't put your estate plan in place, you've lost that control of how you're going to distribute your assets. And if you die without a will, which is the document that defines how you're going to distribute your estate, then the state of Wisconsin is going to decide where your assets are going and who's going to administer the estate. And that's a very costly process, and then there's less money to go to your beneficiaries. And the whole goal of after you've worked so hard and accumulated assets is you really want to maximize the benefit to the beneficiaries and minimize the tax consequences. And you can only do that if you've had a really thought out plan.
This blew me away. I think maybe it was you, TJ, who was telling me that there was a client of one of yours who was really thinking they were doing something nice by being very benevolent to a member of the family, when in effect, you're passing on some tax burdens.
Yes.
How does that work?
Well, it's extremely important when for most of us in this room, when we grew up, finances, we really didn't talk about that to either children or other family members. And I think we should use this as a point. It is extremely important to start to share some of that information of what you're doing as far as your estate planning, a financial plan, because the ramifications that you have, as Kathy mentioned, with putting together a proper estate, will have glaring effects to your children or a charity or a place like this. So it's very important to start to integrate those individuals into your plan also.
Share with me your experiences with that, folks. Yeah.
Well, it's really driven by if you've created wealth in your own right and you have successful children who have also created wealth, you can only shelter so many dollars from federal taxes, or what we call death taxes. And death taxes are very expensive because they're at 45%, a 45% tax rate. So you really need to do proper planning within the whole family if there's wealth, to make sure that you minimize the tax consequences for each generation.
And Kathy, I would build off that by sharing that when you think about that comprehensive or holistic planning, once again, it's a planning process that you begin engaging in. And you want to look at variables. You want to think about the income stream and how you can preserve that for yourself and for generations to come. You want to think very carefully about protecting what you have. You know, we all feel that perhaps we could never have enough, but in the majority of the cases, it's about protecting what you have and then thinking through growth and diversified plans around that. Legacy planning is what you just touched on, and legacy planning is so critically important because that's why we've worked our entire lives. All of us in our professions and everything we do, it's our hopes and our dreams and our greatest aspirations. And it can be something very simple, Mark, that you want preserved that may not be financial related at all. But if you want peace of mind, that's really what we're talking about here, is finding that peace of mind for you and your loved ones and your families, and then making progress and knowing that you did a good thing by being open about it and thinking through it with other professionals.
Eric? Yeah.
As we're talking about these different issues, these are all important issues, and yet it's also important, I think, for us to realize that even if we don't necessarily have legacy assets, and if our financial situations aren't so comprehensive that we can address all the various needs in our life like we would want to in a perfect world, it's still important to find some guidance, to find some assistance to assist us in identifying issues. So again, even if our assets are a little bit more meager, the difference between getting some guidance and not can make a night and day difference in terms of where the assets go, for example, how much may be there, and taxes paid along the way. So even if our situations are not as extensive as others, it's still very important. I think it can make a night and day difference in people's situations to at least get some guidance from somebody who has the expertise.
As an example of that, on a level where most of us have an involvement either with a 401k plan or an IRA account, and those accounts are governed by passing those through via beneficiary. By having those conversations, if your children are the beneficiaries of the account, there are ways to pay out that account where it could be more tax efficient to that child. So having those conversations today rather than later on could save that generation quite a bit of money.
We see that, we're seeing more of that, or reading about more of that as it relates to sports-related contracts or business contracts. It's more long-term, for whatever reason, delayed payment, whatever.
Sure. There's a way as a beneficiary, rather than taking those proceeds as a beneficiary and stretch that out over a lifetime. And that would make quite a bit of a difference just from a tax standpoint if you choose that option versus cashing out the account.
How can we anticipate how inheritance tax-related law might change in a particular state, even after our passing? And and the long-term effects on those who have inherited our property? How do we even anticipate that?
You can't always anticipate where the laws are going to go, where the tax laws are going to change, and I think that's why it's critical to be working with an advisor and reviewing your plans on a regular basis so that they bring to your attention the changes in laws as they occur, because none of us know what that might be.
Right.
But how that's going to impact your specific plan and whether or not that's a good thing for you or maybe not such a good thing. Mm-hmm. And then you can make the proper adjustments. But if you don't ever look at it and then 10 years down the pike, all of a sudden you're faced with maybe some major problems because you haven't planned and there isn't sufficient assets to do whatever it is you want to do.
To the extent that we can anticipate it, though, and think through various scenarios, the decisions you're making today are going to have monumental impact down the road. And so, again, it's a matter of being informed, taking those steps to engage in the dialogue. And many of your advocates and advisors that you work with who have your best interests at heart should have some kind of plan, perhaps real steps, which is one that we happen to use at U.S. Bank. And we really take a look at those changing dynamics, those changing scenarios, continue to get comfortable with that and updating it so that it's not a surprise.
And how fluid is the process? For example, the language within a trust that's set up as it relates to estate planning. Can you update, can you alter quite often the language within that legal document?
As long as the creators of the trust that we refer to as either a grantor, a settlor, or a donor, those might be terms you're familiar with, is still living, you can amend or change the trust at any time. Once you've died, whatever plan you've created, then you have to live by that plan. So then it becomes irrevocable, and it's much more difficult to try and do changes at that point in time.
Eric, as you point out, one of the keys to successful investment is diversity within one's investment through working with traditional banks, investing in the stock market. How does one approach that in putting together a portfolio? I mean, with a financial planner, how do you, in effect, diversify so as to avoid the risk that you might normally be facing?
I think there's a couple questions there. The first question that I think is important to note is that even if someone, for example, if we were all the exact same age and had the exact same financial circumstances, we still might be in very different situations based upon our family needs and income needs and so on. So it's important to look at each person's situation individually. And then we look at things like time horizon and so on. We look at the other assets that they have.
Okay, time horizon, that means?
Generally speaking, how long that they have before they're going to need the money and or how long it needs to last for.
Right.
So you start integrating those types of pieces of information, and it helps position us to be able to determine what balance of stocks, for example, and bonds and other holdings such as bank instruments and so on are appropriate for a client. And then, of course, then life fills in the gap, so to speak, and we have wonderful years like the last 5 years after the second worst correction of all time. So even the best laid plans go through some changes over time. So it's very important, as we're chatting about, to continue maintaining communications with your financial professional.
I know diversity is a big issue with your team too, right?
Yeah, there's a risk of doing nothing, keeping your monies in bank product. That's inflation. We're not keeping up with the cost of goods. There's also a risk of investing and putting your money into the marketplace. We've gone through 2008. There was a lot of volatility. That's going to happen. It's going to happen again. We have to plan for that. And how you get through that is proper diversification, making sure that you have assets, secured, peace of mind monies that you're going to possibly need short term. And then making sure that your portfolio is diversified for those longer term assets like retirement monies, monies that you might need for a home 10 years down the road. So diversification is key.
Yes. Kathy, you're going to add something?
I lost my train of thought as I was listening here to DJ, but really I support it's all about the plan. There's a lot of volatility in the marketplace, and that can derail a plan. And so it's easy if you're working with a good planner that they can tweak or run a number of scenarios based on different rates of return on a portfolio to show you where it might be successful versus where it isn't successful. And then if the market doesn't support the rate of return that we've calculated in your plan, that's part of the discussion as to whether or not it's going to work.
Yes, sir.
A good planner is probably going to spend more time talking about the risks and the downturns of the market more so than the upturns of the marketplace. So if you go into an investment knowing, again, the risks, what could happen, how would that affect my plan, that's how you should approach investing.
Mm-hmm. What is your advice to a client who, to a large extent, is investing in things that investing for the social good? For example, a company that's really into fair trade, whatever, environment protection, that type of thing, as opposed to investing for return. I mean, a lot of folks are investing with their heart and their social conviction. How do you balance that, Jane?
You know, it is a reciprocity economy that we're living in. And so for the most part, I think it's about keeping balance to the approach that you utilize. You know, think about from a short-term, mid-term, long-term perspective, what's most going to be important to you, what's going to meet your needs. And that long-term approach, I can't emphasize that enough. No matter what it is that your conviction is, whether it's your own finances or your giving, that long-term approach of consulting with a number of different professionals to get you there is just critical.
And yes,
there are ways to invest to get you to that social goal, and that's ultimately figuring out what the client wants, what they need, what their goals are, and there are tools that we can use so that we can filter out certain investments that might not fit what they want.
Yes.
Yeah, from my standpoint, I echo everything that they're saying. I would add as well, one of the things that I've always appreciated about my client relationships and the way we work with clients is to make sure to understand what their life is all about. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, it's all about the money, but that's probably pretty rare. In many cases, there are things that mean something to them, or people that mean something, or organizations or institutions. And so in addition to investing in a socially specific manner, which you can do today, those capabilities now exist, I think it's also helpful to talk about the big picture and find out what's important. So whether they've got the great big pot of gold or just the little treasure chest, so to speak, you can still make sure that their life goals are met when they are with proper planning to make sure that something will go to whoever or whatever organization is important to them. Mm-hmm.
These folks are pretty good, aren't they? Would you agree? I would agree. I would certainly agree. Let's go in the audience. We have some questions now. Yes?
You referenced the magic number. And I was listening to a news program just recently, and they said that most Americans now are going to need the magic number of $1 million to retire. What are your thoughts on that? And how realistic is it for most Americans?
Sure. Well, realistically speaking, that can be a challenge. A good rule of thumb is 8 times your annual salary at this point if you are fortunate enough to be gainfully employed and doing well for yourself. But as you mentioned, that can be a stretch. You know, what we really need to do is think through what kind of lifestyle are you going to want to lead when you reach that retirement age. 75% of Americans are still working in their retirement years. That's our new retirement. It's a sense of retiring, the definition almost, if you will, of retirement at this point. So the idea is decide on a lifestyle and then begin working toward that. If you have to have a certain number, I would say set a goal by working with a financial planner that makes sense, stick to that. Start measuring how much you're spending and saving and sharing and learn from that. Think about how you can retire your debts. Think about how you can take advantages of discounts. And those are the simple steps that if we just take some progress and move forward, you'll start to build that nest egg faster.
The key is to move forward.
Yes.
And I would just add that once you do retire, you should continue to work with your advisor in the years after retirement to make sure that you can continue to sustain the lifestyle that you have, or there's something else that doesn't happen in your life that impacts the plan. It doesn't stop all of a sudden because you've decided to retire.
I would break it down to annually. Boy, let's start with a specific percent of a savings goal. And in the benchmark for that for most Americans these days is 10 to 15% of your salary annually. But pick a place to start, and then each year try to increase it by 1 or 2%.
A key to that, budgets and balance sheets. Yeah, we have to figure out ultimately what your retirement income goal is going to be. So if we use the $1 million benchmark, as a real general rule that we use, if you take 4% of that asset base on an annual basis, you're only looking at $40,000 of income. And then what we do is we add on whether or not you're going to have Social Security benefits, whether you have the benefit of having a pension, and what those numbers total up to, we'd go back to you and say, is this going to be enough to sustain you for what could turn out to be a long time? Longevity is something that we really have to be concerned about. Retirement is literally the longest vacation of your life. We could be in retirement for 20 to 30 years. That's a long time. So we need that 4% to be extremely flexible. That is not a hard number. So we could back into that retirement income need and see if that is going to be enough.
My God, retirement has become a new generation. I mean, it's a generation of people. It's crazy. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
I think the $1 million number is a very common number we see in the industry today, and it pops up in a lot of press from time to time. And I think it's both helpful and a little bit of a challenge. When we're sitting talking, we do a lot of 401k work. When we're talking to 20-some-year-olds or 30-some-year-olds, we help them realize they can put 6, 7, 8% of their pay away, and when they get to that age, they're going to have their $1 million. That's pretty helpful for them. When you're talking about $1 million with someone in their 40s or 50s or 60s that has $100,000 in a 401k and maybe a home that's largely paid off and not much more, I think it can be a very intimidating number and therefore not helpful. So I think the bottom line, and again, we chatted about this before, is no matter how big the pot is or how small it is, even if you're thinking, oh, I keep hearing $1 million and I only have 1/10 of that or 1/5 of that, please find someone that you trust, that you have confidence in to assist you, because no matter where you are on this, it can make a night and day difference in terms of how prepared you are. Even if you're in your late 50s and early 60s, it can still make a difference. And then as Kathy said, when you get to retirement, it can make a critical difference.
Right.
How you take your money out in retirement can be almost as important as how much money you have going into retirement. It can make that much of a difference.
It really can.
And we have another question. Yes.
Speaking of the retirement issue with advisors, we talked about getting support in your plan. Can you discuss the difference between a fee-based program as opposed to a sales product type program? Because I know a lot of people have issues with how much money they're paying outside of what they're actually getting from their reinvestments.
Yeah, I'll take that one. That is a great question.
We'll let you have that one.
I like that question.
As I mentioned, a good advisor is going to answer a lot of these questions up front. And you have a couple of different approaches, one being a transactional approach where you're going to pay for a given product. Sometimes those fees are up front. Sometimes those fees could be a back-end charge. And then most product will have a built-in internal expense, which is very difficult to open up that prospectus and find out exactly what you're being charged. So that should be pointed out to you. On the fee-based, or what we call the managed side, which at U.S. Bank we tend to gravitate towards this within our trust relationships, you have a pay-as-you-go option, and what that does is it puts the advisor and the client on the same side of the table. So it's an ongoing fee. We tend to look at it as you have to earn that business every quarter. That too, though, should be shown to you what my expense is going to be, and are there any buried costs and or any transactional fees on top of that. So that is a great question. A lot of your initial meetings with an advisor should be built around answering those questions so that you can feel very comfortable, at least initially, and ongoing with the products that you're picking out.
And comfort level is so essential.
Trust and comfort level with an advisor, with the institution that you're working with. I can't put enough stock in that.
Yeah. Another question from the audience. Yes, Allison.
I actually have two questions. The first one is, we talked about the $1 million golden number. And when I think about when my husband and I started working 30 years ago, we invested in our 401k, and that we were told that when we retire, we'll have the $1 million and we'll be fine. Well, now we're in our 50s and we don't have anywhere near that. You know, things have changed. So what do we do? Do we continue putting money into our 401k? Do we do some additional things? And my second question is, when, you know, there's been so many people that have lost their jobs, that sort of thing, and so now they've got, you know, they still have bills and that kind of thing. Should they be cashing out some of their funds, or, you know, before that what is the next number where things come to fruition and there's no taxes, 59 or something like that.
59.
Should they cash in and pay off their debts? Should they take out loans to cover it until that time? What should somebody do?
May I start with the first one?
Yes.
I feel really strongly about, we work with clients that have some significant net worth, and as I've mentioned, we work with a lot of employees of firms that maybe don't have, they're on the other end of the spectrum.
Yes.
And we chatted about this before. I think we're beginning to make this clear, but no matter where you are on the spectrum of how prepared you are in light of where you'd like to be, you can always be doing something more. So for example, in your situation, where maybe the $1 million isn't there yet, first of all, it's important to remember that it's the last 10 years or so that makes the biggest difference. So even if you're close to half that amount, in theory, based upon reasonable market conditions, you will likely be there. But the other thing is that if by chance many of us aren't quite where we want to be, the baby boomers kind of missed a couple decades there of knowing what to do and didn't do it. So I continue to be a big fan of sitting down, finding someone that you have respect for, helping to carve out a way that you can do even a little bit more. And I would also suggest, when you then have done what you can do, to let it go. And what I mean by that is that it's been my experience, I've worked with many clients, I've been in the business for over 34 years, where they, in some cases, had great riches, in some cases, they barely had enough money to retire, period. And yet they still had very happy lifestyles in retirement because they weren't picking on themselves for what they didn't do. So we can't do anything about yesterday or before, but we can always start today to take another step. And when we do it, what we've done, then work with a professional, meet with them from time to time, and enjoy life. It's not the finances that drive the joy that we have in life. It can be helpful, but it's not the finances that create the joy in life.
If you're looking to save for retirement, to reiterate, the 401k plan is a great way to save. So we all have to make sure that we are saving and making contributions into the 401k. For individuals that are above the age of 50, we have catch-up contributions that we can do. So you can not only put in your regular contribution, but make a catch-up contribution. IRAs have the ability of putting in more dollars if you're above the age of 50. The key age that you have to be concerned about is above 59 and a half. If you take out withdrawals from those types of accounts, you avoid the 10% penalty, but you still have to pay taxes. So getting back to her second question, you have to really balance that out. If you're looking at paying off debt and using assets to do so, there could be a cost from a fee standpoint. There could be taxes and/or penalties. And we're coming off an economy where the Fed has had to keep interest rates extremely low. That's created the opportunity of having debt at a very low interest rate and possibly leaving your longer-term assets that could possibly give you a higher rate of return left to work for you. So if you have the proper budgeting, if you can cash flow and make those debt payments, it might not make the most sense to pay off that debt, especially with assets that are getting possibly a better rate of return.
Thank you to both of you. Yes, next question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm one of those baby boomers that missed a couple decades. And as a result, I wasn't a good role model for my 20-somethings, my 3 children. So now my parents are investing, they're in their 80s, but their investor needed $500,000 in order to accept them. So some investors have limits, and I don't know enough to be able to know what to tell my children, because I want to encourage them to invest in their 20s so they don't wait too long like we did in my generation.
I'd like to start in response to that. Relates to the conversation we had earlier, Kathy. When you think about transparency and a sense of open communication, trying to establish that within generations and within families is so important. You know, it's simple conversations about helping the 20-year-olds think through how they save, spend, and share. In your parents' case, it's thinking through who do we collaborate with for good answers. In the industry today, we are there to serve every segment. There shouldn't be a situation where an advisor says you have to have this absolute dollar amount before we'll speak to you. Especially at US Bank, the idea is we come and meet you where you are. We get great understanding of what your concerns are. We find a way to develop some answers and milestone planning, and then we move forward. So it is true that there are different levels of services available. The idea is, can I get world-class competency and expertise at my fingertips for the lowest expense or cost possible. And that's one of the things that Real Steps plan will help folks with, that we're working on.
And from the banker's point of view, it's about not only investing in that individual, but investing in the community as a whole.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. You know, again, the reciprocity economy, as the welfare and the strength of our community goes, so we all go. We're all in this together. When we do good financial planning together, it benefits the entire community. When we don't, it doesn't. And I think sometimes, Mark, just by being aware and connecting with your financial planners, your bankers, talking through what available resources are there in the community. You know, just this last few weeks, we were able to take people that were in a foreclosure situation, that had no idea where they were going to go the next day, and put them in a home by partnering with the Northwest Side CDC, several different partners, and help get them on a great path to recovery.
You put them in touch with that agency.
Absolutely, and we actually donated a foreclosed home and celebrated putting that family right back in a home again with their newly adopted son. Now that is caring for one another in our community. And at one point, they were probably fairly hopeless. It's us working together, being optimistic about retirement planning. You know, sometimes it gives us so much anxiety. It's a negative thought process that prevails. We can reverse that by just getting together and speaking about some of your ideas and your concerns.
Eric, there really are some wonderful life scenarios in the community.
Yeah, there really are. And kudos to U.S. Bank for the way that they provide services to a wide range of people regardless of resources. We're an independent investment advisory firm, and a lot of the people in our industry have minimums of $100,000 or $500,000 or $1 million, and I'm a big fan of believing each firm needs to run the way they choose to run. Our firm is a firm that will basically assist anyone, so we're not nearly the scale of who you are, but spending time with people, understanding their needs, and helping find even the smallest solution, which can make a night and day difference, is something that we've done. So the It's a Wonderful Life scenario can exist, but I'll go back to what we chatted about earlier. It's important for someone to say, hey, I could use some help. There's been some, like Elizabeth was kind enough to mention earlier, that she's not quite where she wants to be at this point, and that's the stepping point of, like, I realize that, and I'm going to reach out and ask for help. Both of our organizations are happy to help, and there are many more wonderful people and organizations that will help, but it starts with a person saying, need some help, or might need some help, or at least can someone take a look, because I don't know.
And those are the individuals at that age where the power of compounding is huge when it comes to investing. So if we can invest in our 20s and 30s with as little as $25 a month, 401k plan or not, that's the time to really get started and really have a huge effect later on to a portfolio.
Yeah.
Well, it's really an education process, and if you don't feel equipped to have that education process with your children, there are many advisors out there that again, the key is getting them started, getting them introduced, and sometimes children listen to others better than they listen to our parents.
Occasionally. We've seen a couple youth in the 34 years that actually listen to other people more than their parents.
How good are we, though, about talking finances with their own spouse, with their own partner?
We aren't. We aren't.
And why is that?
You know, I just think it's a comfort level and a communication level. It's interesting. We've done some goal-based planning for our clients at U.S. Bank, and we have these 10 cards of, you know, it lists retirement and aspiration goals of being philanthropic and your lifestyle and leaving money to your family. And we sit a husband and wife down and ask them to put them in the order of priority, and it really generates very interesting dynamic conversations because very rarely do they match up as to what is a priority for each of them. They very rarely have the same number one priority. So.
But your point is very common, that unfortunately we tend to have a lead when we sit down and meet with individuals. And whoever that person is in the relationship, the other person doesn't want to get involved. I don't want to be bothered by that. I trust you. Go ahead and make all of those decisions. And unfortunately, we've seen in our careers where that comes back to haunt the relationship. We have an individual that is not up to speed as far as the education, the plan, the expectations, what may have occurred at death. So to have the individuals on the same page and at least involved is extremely crucial.
Well, and of course that's critical in the event of, unfortunately, of a divorce or in the event of a death.
Yeah.
And you're suddenly opening up the drawer, trying to find the checkbook and the receipts and trying to make sense of something that you've turned over to your spouse because they are, quote unquote, the expert in the family and finances. Right. There's no way to live, right? There's no way to live.
No, it's not, and it's more common than you would think.
Yeah. Next question. No more questions. One of the things that you, yes.
So there's a
In the back.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, regarding Social Security and integrating it into your retirement plan, years ago they used to say take it as soon as you can. Now I'm hearing that it's just the opposite, it is to postpone it and take it as late as you can. What are your feelings on that?
I'm happy to take the lead on that one.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people get their Social Security choices and they pick whatever choice makes the most sense. Please, please, I think the four of us would agree, please, please, please get some competent guidance there.
Yeah,
I was at a conference about 2 weeks ago. They had another CE session on Social Security, and they used the example of a person at 62, or that same person taking their Social Security either at 62 or I think it was 66, their full retirement age. And they assumed the person had a life expectancy to age 83, and there was over a $300,000 difference between how much they would have received in Social Security income if they would have waited until their full retirement age as opposed to taking it early. But about 68% of people today take it early. So the right answer is none of us can tell you what's right for everybody because there's no such thing as what's right for everybody. However, I think we were all nodding. Please make sure before you or your parents or your friends or your siblings, before they sign up, get some competent guidance.
You know, look at it in a holistic context of other options that you have. You know, naturally we're all inclined to say, well, if I can wait and not do it at 62 and do it later, I'm going to have more money. That may not be the best solution or source of funding or reliability income available to you at this point in time when you look at everything that you have. So again, making a very insightful choice is key here.
How important is it in the planning process to plan for the unexpected happenings? And if so, how do you go about doing that? How do you anticipate some bad medical news? How do you anticipate a job loss? And how do you prepare for that? How do you create that rainy day?
You know, there's just no substitute for that. I mean, you really want to have your heart and mind set on 6 to 8 months worth of resources is key. And I think anticipate that medical costs alone. I read the other day it's about $215,000 beyond Medicaid support that our boomers are in for, and thinking through that on a typical case. And so thinking through long-term retirement planning in terms of health care available to you, assisted living, start researching now. Don't wait until the time when you feel like you need it, and make sure that as you settle into some of those arrangements that you can afford those premiums and those policies throughout the duration of your retirement planning.
Yeah, that's
well, and when there is an unforeseen event, that's a good time to go back and revisit your whole plan and reach back out to your advisors and make adjustments.
Absolutely.
When we do a Real Steps financial plan through U.S. Bank, we're not just taking that information, as you talked about, putting it into the plan and seeing what the results are. That is one step. But the other step is a good plan will get stressed. We will throw at curveballs and figure out what is that going to do to your plan. If so, what would that cause? Are there ways to mitigate that risk, like a long-term care event? 70% of us in this room, if you haven't gone through this yet, will go through some type of long-term care issue, either with yourself or a family member. That needs to be put into a financial plan, stress the plan, see what that does, and make sure that you address it today.
So you're a little bit like a psychologist. You actually, does a good bank, no, I'm not trying to be funny, but does a good banker actually challenge a client?
Yes, we wear many hats. Absolutely. And we are not, we look at ourselves as not yes people. We do have to say no every once in a while. We pride ourselves on pushing back. That's what we're here for. You know, a plan can create and bring up a lot of different emotions, and that you're getting at the grit of what you need to do with a financial plan.
Can a client misunderstand that when you are pushing back for his or her own benefit? Do they not quite understand it sometimes?
I think
I think that oftentimes you have to, in the education process, you have to revisit it more than once.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so critical for you to develop a relationship with your advisor and somebody that you truly trust so that you believe what they're telling you. And oftentimes it's very complicated, and the first time you hear it, you don't understand it. And so it needs to be revisited, and that's why the education process is so important.
You know, going in with eyes wide open.
Right.
And I think when you talk about the spirited advocacy, I'm here to help you sometimes keep out of harm's way for sake of yourself.
Yeah, sure.
Folks will still sometimes make the decision that perhaps they shouldn't, but we feel better, we all feel better, we make an educated decision in that regard. So really like DJ that you brought up that when we go through a full planning process, I have found myself in being a user of those planning processes, it influences the decisions that I make next. I now actually pause to get that advice, that expertise before I decide what car I'm going to buy or lease next, and really think about the trade-off choice or the opportunity cost or benefit that has to me. I don't have to get emotional about those decisions anymore. I get very rational.
Being a consumer has helped you be a better banker.
I think so. We are consumers and bankers, and we understand both the challenges and the risks involved. We see it every day.
I think the idea of communicating with a financial professional you feel comfortable with can be very helpful. We've all seen statistics that somewhere around 60+% of the baby boomers that are retiring don't have sufficient assets currently to be able to maintain their lifestyle through retirement. And sometimes the numbers are higher depending on what study you look at. So for me, one of the most important things we can do is it's nice to be able to have a list of all the things that we'd like someone to be able to do, but there may be a cost to that might be, pick a number, thousands of dollars per month, and maybe there's only a fraction of that available. So by consulting with a financial advisor, someone that you feel is competent and you care for and cares for you, they can at least help you make the decisions and help you create a long-term plan. And maybe you don't do all of A through F, for example. Maybe you start with A, B, and C, and you aspire to getting to D next year and so on. So this isn't just for the people that have everything. It's for the people that are where we are looking to be in that place and meeting all of our same needs, even though the resources.
Everyone's important.
Correct.
Everyone's important. Yes, we have another question in the audience.
So, is it true you can gift each year up to $13,000 per person, and that then saves either or both parties the gift tax, the inheritance tax? Can you address that?
You can actually gift up to $14,000 this year per individual without having to report it on a gift tax return, so it doesn't eat into your federal exclusion amount. So for the very wealthy, that's a good way to transition some assets and get them out of your estate currently so that you don't have to pay inheritance taxes at death. So that is one of the strategies and planning ideas. Each individual has, with the Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012, we have a $5 million exclusion, which is adjusted for inflation. So for 2014, it's $5,340,000 that each individual can shelter from federal, is their federal exclusion or shelter from federal estate taxes. And they also made something called portability permanent, whereas if you are married and you don't use your whole credit, the surviving spouse can make a portability election so that they can use the credit that wasn't used, so that truly a married couple can shelter $680,000 because it's $5,340,000. So it's a great strategy planning tool for you if you have that kind of wealth.
So that takes the next step. So we've talked about financial planning, and now you're going into estate planning, which is extremely crucial. Mixing in that advisor, such as an attorney, to make sure that that next step, that you're using those exemptions and passing along assets in the most efficient way.
So,
and tax-effective way.
You've all been at this, your trade, for a long time. What makes for a good financial advisor? What are the tools that he or she brings to the table? Eric?
I would start with a couple things. For me, I'm a big fan of people being independent. In my career, there have been many times where I've seen someone who works for a company and they sell that company's products, and so we look at the client, and the client's got this barrage of financial products that may or may not be in their best interest. I think the years of experience can be huge, and I think one of the most important things for people is to find someone that they feel comfortable with. In many cases, the spouses may not even see eye to eye, or one does the finance and one doesn't do any. So if the link to someone that you can both communicate with, so that we can then provide competent communications and guidance back, and it'll be well received, I think is important.
A proven track record of trust and integrity is key. And back to the point that you made, which I think is fantastic, think about asset managers. Who's informing those decisions? Is it just one professional, one individual, or do they have a group, as in the case of U.S. Bank, of 30 expert asset management advisors? That's all they do all day long, is analyzing markets, taking a look at global trends. We get that information and put that to work for many of our clientele that perhaps couldn't afford that kind of expertise. It might mostly be available to people that have $50 million in assets and over. So there's a key combination there of both of the points I think that you brought up.
Similar to integrated medicine, where the internist is speaking with the psychologist who's speaking with,
And I agree with everything that's been said, but I think you also need to be a really good listener.
Yes.
You really need to listen to your client.
What are you listening for?
You're listening for what their goals are, what their objectives are, because we're trying to bring the solutions to the table so that you can achieve those goals. And if we don't really listen to what you're trying to accomplish, you know, it isn't about just throwing out solutions because the bank's going to make some money because we're selling a product. That's not what we're trying to accomplish. We're really trying to work with you, advise you, so that your goals, dreams, and aspirations are achieved. And that's
I love that you brought that up.
But I want to fully understand, is when you're listening to a client and they're explaining to you their goals, as long as they're realistic goals, client A's goals might not necessarily be the same as client B's goals, but as long as they're financially sound, that's okay. We all have different goals.
Right.
You've got to be honest with what you really want.
You've got to be honest, and as long as they're realistic goals, we should be able to come up with a solution to help you get there. It might not be in your time frame, because we always have to be cognizant of that. So maybe you can't buy a new car every year. Maybe you can only buy it every other year based on the plan. But again, if that's something that's a real trigger button for you, we need to hear that so that we can incorporate that into the solution.
What skills do you admire in a planner?
Trust goes a long way. Again, I want a friend, you know, whether we're talking about financial or just buying windows. You know, I need somebody that I can really relate to, feel comfortable with, have a conversation. I've been in too many sales processes where the person trying to selling does way too much talking up front rather than listening. So that point is absolutely key. There's a great website. FINRA is the governing entity that governs the security industry, FINRA. That site you can go to, and you can actually do research on an advisor that you're looking up. You can see how long they've been in the industry, what licenses they have, what states that they're registered in. So you can do some of that legwork if you have an advisor in mind to see what FINRA says about that individual.
How do most of your clients come to you? Is it word of mouth?
I'd say oftentimes word of mouth for us. I want to add to the FINRA that the other thing you can find on the FINRA website is if there's been any disciplinary history. So our industry has a few regulations, and I'm really joking when I say that. It's probably among the most regulated industries. And you might benefit from selecting someone that's got years of experience but has made it through unscathed and so on.
And there are people, I mean, we get unsolicited calls on our cell phones, we get unsolicited emails. There are a lot of people who pose as experienced financial planners. What are the dangers out there, Jane? I mean, what should be mindful of? There are many.
So glad that you brought that up. You know, senior citizens in particular these days, there are so many different fraudulent scams out there. Awareness and education, I cannot emphasize that enough. If you need more information on that, I would consult U.S. Bank's Financial Genius website. We have an article there for financial smarts for seniors. What we're looking for here is people calling, asking for information. And you really want to take the time to check with your bank. You know those lottery checks that you see all the time, Mark? If they're too good to be true, they are. And so really, again, that consult and asking is so important. But if someone's asking you for information over the phone, be very careful with that. The mail, you know, closest of caregivers and kin, 66% of the fraud that occurs happens with close kinship, family members or caregivers. So So again, important to have several individuals perhaps interacting and have complete transparency in what is happening with those financial situations.
You know, as a consumer, it warms my heart to see you repeatedly throughout this hour. All of you have said, we serve clients with great net worth. We serve average clients. We serve clients who are struggling. We serve clients who have gone through foreclosure. With that in mind, money doesn't buy happiness, but what does buy happiness is control of your future. And you can control your future to some extent if you're mindful of your finances at whatever level. Am I right?
Control better, absolutely, with some competent guidance.
Peace of mind and realizing that we are all here to enable the best journey that we can in each other. That's just so vitally important. And so it is about living a life of significance.
And honesty. You have to be honest with the planner. You have to be truthful. DJ, you were going to add something to that.
We own our retirement. That's what's key.
Yeah.
It is up to us. We can't rely upon the government. We can't rely upon others. We have to take the proper measures to make sure the retirement is
DJ, Kathy, Jane, and Eric, you've all been wonderful. How about a round of applause for our guests today? Our audience has been great. We've enjoyed our visit here at Port Exploreum. Port Washington is a jewel in the state of Wisconsin. We appreciate the hospitality here. I'm Mark Segrist. Until next time, have a great evening.